Hello and welcome back to Kitco Mining with me, Paul Harris. Today we're talking about tungsten and I have great pleasure to introduce Kitco Mining sponsor, Lewis Black, who is CEO of Almonty Industries. Lewis, welcome to Kitco.
Good morning, Paul.
Now, tungsten is a metal that perhaps not many people are familiar with, but it's getting an increasing number of headlines. So let's start at the beginning by talking about what it is used for, and where does it come from?
Well, I think the easiest way to start with it is that it's used in everything. So when you analyze, metal consumption, they're normally specific to certain sectors. Tungsten is in every sector. I mean, it sounds absurd that one metal can be in everything, both technology and in industrial, but it is. From extremities such as aerospace or automotive, all the way to semiconductors, to screens, to tungsten copper wires. Then you've got balancing mechanisms for satellites. And of course, munitions is really one of the reasons why it's front and center. Defense is a very voracious consumer of tungsten. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's been handled so discreetly in recent years, is because it's so sensitive and there are very few opportunities to produce it.
So, that military application, if you like, tungsten's adds hardness to metal. It's used in industrial uses for hardening, for machine tools and things like that. But obviously in munitions, it is used to put on the tips of, I guess, shells to help penetrate armor. And I guess it's those uses that sees tungsten put on an increasing number of critical minerals lists around the world, most notably with NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's the most recent organization to do so. Why are so many organizations and countries putting tungsten on their critical minerals lists?
Well, I think because firstly, it's not just defense, it's part of the global economy. So you can't produce semiconductors without it. You can't produce a car without it. You can't produce an aircraft without it. So it's a backbone to a manufacturing sector. But in terms of defense, and why NATO and these countries and the United States, of course, place so much importance on this, is because the Ukraine war has highlighted the rather unusual situation that the munitions that you deploy are in fact dependent on three primary countries, Russia, China, and North Korea, for the tungsten. And in fact, you find yourself in a conflict where they sit on one side and you sit on the other. And you can see that from a purely common sense, pragmatic approach, that may not be a fantastic strategy to depend on your munition products from the three entities that you may face off against.
So China, Russia, North Korea, how much of world production or world supply do these three countries provide?
Around 90%. So they're very dominant.
Okay, and how much does the US and Canada produce, for example?
Zero.
Wow.
None.
So, okay, in a nutshell there, you've got the issue at hand. Okay, and I suppose that's intensified because this morning, as we were getting ready to come on air, China announced export restrictions on, I think, 6 critical products. Tungsten was one of those. So it does seem that geopolitical competition for strategic resources such as tungsten is heating up.
I think the question has always been, and let's put geopolitics to one side for a minute. Let's look at market share. China was very effective in procuring market share by bringing prices very low. And that was a way of buying the market share. You drive everyone out of business and you're the last man standing. So the question has always been over the last 5, 6, 7 years, what was China going to do to defend its market share as the push for more diversification became more prevalent across the board, across many different democracies? In one hand, with rare earths and lithium, you saw prices collapse. Therefore, it's not attractive to capital to develop alternate sources. In tungsten, they seem to be going a different way. They seem to be going for starvation of the consumer, the Western consumer. After all, if the consumer can't buy the raw materials, he can't produce the downstream products. So this is a very different approach, but it's been something that has been very much on the radar. It has been very much forthcoming, and the response by all of us, is at the moment, Plan B is still being formulated, but there aren't a plethora of tungsten projects outside of China or Russia or North Korea. There's very few, and the ones that are normally very low grade, even fewer in democracies. So, yes, at the moment, this news today has certainly sent shockwaves through our sector.
Now, we're going to talk in a moment about Almonty and your production plan, but before we do so, with the announcement this morning, I imagine you've been getting some pretty interesting calls. Who's been calling you today?
Oh, I can't possibly tell you that because, I'll get into all kinds of trouble. But certainly there's a high degree of political and commercial concern about this. But like in any game of poker, can you really show your cards that much? I think we're very fortunate in that we seem to be doing what we're doing right at the right time. And not just from a commercial sense, but also from an independence, a diversification sense. But I would say what's the next big moment is what the Chinese government will decide in their Congress in March. If they lift the environmental ban on tungsten scrap so that the Chinese consumers can now buy, procure, and consume tungsten scrap, then it's on, because then the Western consumers have lost access to all raw materials because it's almost impossible for them to compete against China, irrespective of price. And so that's going to be the next big moment to wait for. Okay.
Now, Almonty Industries, you have several tungsten projects around the world, and you're building a 2,500 ton per year operation at Shandong in South Korea, which is a West-friendly country. What are your plans there? How much are you investing, and when will you be in production?
Well, it's cost us around about 130 million US dollars. It opens in about 2 months, maybe 3. But we're in the final furlong now, so that's good. It's phase 1 is 2,500 tons. Phase 2 moves it up to closer to 5,000. Phase 2, the work on that will begin almost immediately, and it's a 12-month expansion because a lot of the work for phase 2 has already been done in phase 1. And as we've also and that's almost entirely going to both Korea and to the US, and it's finding its way predominantly into the defense sector, that material. And we've also just recently announced, of course, the moly with our moly mine, which is also fully permitted. And construction will begin probably later this year once the Korean debt is finalized. And it's only 150 meters from our existing infrastructure. So we seem to have, by complete luck, timed our opening of the world's largest tungsten mine at a moment when tungsten has become front and center. But as they say, in mining, it's better to be lucky than smart sometimes. So I think we've certainly seen someone's smiling on us right now, and that's always a good thing for our shareholders.
A little serendipity never hurt anybody. Yeah.
No.
Now, in terms, 2,500 tons a day being expanded to 5,000 tons a day. To put that in perspective, how much of global supply would that be? How much of Western supply would you be able to meet, or Western demand, would you be able to meet?
Well, you'd meet, in terms of global supply, Chinese numbers are always a little, unreliable, but ballpark, you're probably somewhere in the region of all of our mines, somewhere in the region of 10 to 12% of global supply, which is not bad when 90% of it comes from China and Russia and North Korea. In terms of non-Chinese supply, we're probably going to be close to 30, 35%. But what's interesting about the Korean project is that as we don't need any further permits and the deposit is horizontal, which meant that if, the worst thing happened in the world and there was a real problem, you could expand the mine further because it has vast amounts of high-grade reserves, more than 100 plus years. You could actually produce far more than 5,000 tons. Theoretically, you could produce everything the US needed. Of course, we still have friends in the EU, so you'd have to consider that. But you do have a mine of such scale that it could be uprated very quickly. It's just a question of whether I have the energy to do it, because it's, it's a bit of, I'm a bit, the management team's quite small in Almonty. I started this business and it's a 7-day-a-week job, I think is the best way to put it.
Now, with tungsten being increasing demand from numerous sources, how have you funded the project development? Have you been able to tap into some of the funding that's being made available for strategic resources?
No, we find that there's quite a lengthy process, and to be honest, we already had good support. The project in Korea was financed 80% by KfW IPEC, so the sort of number one project finance lender in the world. Yes, they'd never done tungsten before. They'd never done something as small as us before, but they already recognized that it was very viable. We are looking to the EU to support an expansion in our Portuguese project. But governments traditionally it's a long journey. Maybe today's announcement is going to sort of hurry things up a little bit, but, we go to market, when we need equity. I'm one of the largest, I think I'm the second largest shareholder, and I put over $13 million of my own money into this. So I'm one of those rare managers in these juniors who actually has flesh in the game. And that's meant that I've been very careful with the money we've taken. We've taken always friendly debt, low cost, equity. I've done as little as I possibly have had to. So I've tried to manage it and maintain our independence. We have no rich uncle. We don't have a big equity fund behind us. And that was deliberate. I think we had to be nimble. We had to be creative. And as a consequence, we are the premier company outside of China for tungsten.
I like your adjustment to the analogy about skin in the game. Flesh in the game is sounds so much more. You've got so much more in the game. Now, tungsten is not an exchange-traded metal like copper or nickel is. So, how is it traded? How do people such as yourselves or your clients get price discovery?
Well, your fast markets publishes once a week. But, they of course work on spot business conducted out of Rotterdam. But that inventory is normally supplied by China. And right now, the pot is empty. The last container was sold recently, and Minmetals have said they're not sure when they're going to replenish. So the price of tungsten is higher in China than it is in the West currently. So there's a bit of a disconnect. One of the reasons why China is so voraciously buying all the concentrate from the West that they can. I think the mechanism is probably going to have to evolve to reflect the geopolitics that we find ourselves in. And I look to organizations like the International Tungsten Industry Association to finally get far more proactive in looking at pricing mechanisms that reflect a very strategically important metal. Step one, you must have greater transparency on pricing. Step two, it must be independent of what happens in China. It must be a reflection of markets. So yes, pricing is always been quite opaque, but I do believe that there will now be a further push by the consumers to find something which is more reflective of the market.
Now, pricing is one aspect, and as you mentioned at the top of our conversation, Lewis, the tungsten is used across all sectors. And you also mentioned you're a relatively small management team. So I imagine commercialization of your product will be quite a challenge given the diversity of markets you can potentially sell it into. How are you planning to commercialize it?
Well, I mean, we everything we produce, we sell, and I could sell 3 times what I produce, even after phase 2. Such is the demand amongst my customers. I've only ever sold to South Korea, to Japan, to the EU, and to the US. I have a great Rolodex of some of the biggest consumers of this material. We have a long track record with them. We've always delivered on time and to spec. We have a good, healthy relationship with these customers. They want the material for free. I want more money than they want to give me. So it's the usual dynamic between us. But I think, as I said, I could produce, if I produce 3 times what my maximum output, I could sell it. I could place it without trouble. And in Portugal, I even received premiums for the material because the material is particularly good grade. It's a particularly clean and homogeneous concentrate that we produce. It has a desirability to some customers for certain applications. and they are happy to pay almost a 25% market premium for that. So that's quite unusual. But again, talking of unusual, if you look at our offtakes, we have hard floors, no cap on the upside. We're the only tungsten company to have this, where if China ever collapsed the price again, it makes no difference. We have this hard floor to cover all of our obligations and still have enough left over for a decent steak dinner once a week. So I think this is reflective. And our moly as well also has this hard floor, our moly contract. So I think this is the future. The future is we work in partnership with our customers. We don't ask them for money because they don't like to part with money. But we ask for other instruments like hard floors so that if the worst case happens, we still survive, they still get supplied. And I think that's where the future is going with strategic metals.
Now, one thing in your future is changing, Lewis, as you recently announced that you're going to move the company's domicile from Canada to the US. Obviously, this week, a lot of the news has been dominated by headlines of tariffs, the USA imposing tariffs on Canada. I imagine that wasn't the reason for the move, but maybe you can go into what is the motivation behind your change of domicile.
Well, I think, we've been in Canada a long time, but there's no customers for our material in Canada. There's a huge demand in the US. We have a lot of shareholders from America in the stock. I'm an American, despite my accent. We have a board of directors that are American. And I believe America is going to be extremely active in our space, especially defense orientated. And whether we like it or not, we have to now decide as strategic miners where our future lies. Because to be ring fenced and protected as an American corporation affords us probably a lot more influence, because you can't move a mine, than staying in Canada, who are very nice to everybody. And they'll just say, if something bad happens to us or any of our mines, the Canadians will apologize and that'll be the end of it. So I think it was time to move to the US, time to expose ourselves to a much more liquid market, and time to recognize that our customers very much are supportive of this move, predominantly because, they're American. So they like having, and we'll be the only US company that actually produces tungsten. So it's not a bad thing to be the only one, unique. And so there wasn't one particular reason. It was something that was on my radar. I had to think about doing it at some point. I decided last year, and this was before talk of tariffs and all these things, even before, obviously, the election here in the US. So it's a natural evolution of what the company is doing. And I think this is the next stage of our growth.
You're listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. So will you be sort of looking to change your primary listing to a US exchange?
It's not decided at this moment. Right now, we have our listing on the ASX and the TSX. We have great liquidity in Germany and in Canada. For a junior, we have one of the best liquidities. I've always believed in trying to walk to the finish line. I know it drives some of my shareholders crazy when we're building this project in Korea, and I say, patience, we walk to the finish line. I take our listing and the approach of corporate the same way. No, there's no rush to make a mistake. We always move forward, but do so with purpose and with reason. If we have a reason to list in the US, then we will. But at this moment, this is just a redomiciling.
Okay. Now, a key milestone this year will be bringing South Korea into production. What else is on your outlook for the year, Lewis?
We bring into production, then we will straight away pivot into expanding that production immediately. As soon as we commission, we'll start the underground mine development. We will hopefully finalize the funding, or at least the debt portion, for the moly mine, because obviously we've signed this deal with one of Korea's largest companies, and so, which is 16% owned by the government. So that's a big milestone. And that moly mine has the opportunity to double our revenue again from phase 2 in tungsten. We will have further news on the downstream of our tungsten mine at the request of the Korean government. And I think what makes this quite unique is that we're going to fuel our growth almost exclusively internally. because we have these two enormous projects that are permitted. One is about to open, and we can downstream the tungsten. That we're not going to be looking to grow through acquisition. We're going to grow through our own use of capital internally. So this year is going to be busy, and another year I don't get a vacation, but maybe next year I'll get one. That's how I look at it.
Well, Lewis, I wish you the best of luck with that. Wish you the best of luck with the commissioning. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you very much for your sponsorship.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's all for now. If you like what you see, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I am Paul Harris, and this is Kitco Mining.